Okay, so first thing to get out of the way is I apologize for the sort of lack of scriptedness for this video, but this is something that I've wanted to make a video about for some time, and I guess I just felt now was the time, and I didn't want to sit down and write a script, so I'm just kind of winging it. If there's anything I get wrong, I will apologize for that. Of course, feel free to leave me a comment about that if that's the case. But basically, let's hop to it. There is a subject that's been catching my eye a lot over the last, let's say, decade or so, and that is a not necessarily a theory about the Zelda timeline, but more so an interpretation of it. And this is something, the term that kind of has been coined about this is the literal legend interpretation. So what is the literal legend interpretation? Well, let's break it down here. This is something when timeline theorization comes up a lot, this is something people throw at me quite a lot. And this basically is just a disregard for anything that is in the realm of timeline theories. And I find it something that a lot of people who maybe grew up with a lot of the earlier games bring forth and say, like, hey, I was playing Zelda in the 80s, and this is what I think about it. So what is the literal legend interpretation? Well, it is pretty much what it sounds like. It is the interpretation that there is no Zelda timeline, but it is a literal legend of Zelda, and that all of the games are a legend and often a retelling of the same story, and as with legends and retellings, details can change. So the legend is that there is, bad guy Ganon, there's a princess Zelda, and the hero Link, and the hero Link has to go through 3 trials, and he gets the legendary Master Sword or other sword that's relevant to the story, and then he goes through some dungeons and stuff and ends up defeating Ganon, and there's the Triforce there, and Zelda is saved, and the details of all the stuff that happens in between is open to debate, as the retellings, some have different settings and details and some have others, but basically they're not connected, and Nintendo did not plan this out as a timeline. That's not how they designed the games, and we shouldn't think too hard about it. So that's all well and good if that is how you comfortably want to play the games. If that is how you want to say, okay, you know what, I don't want to think about it like this. I just want to play these games and have fun, and these people are just taking this too seriously and whatever, And that's often the argument. And if this is genuinely how you want to play the games and just think about it, okay, that's great. That's the great thing about video games, is that they are art, and art can be open to interpretation. But my issue stems from, if you want to tell me that the way I'm thinking about this and the way that is confirmed canon and stuff like this is wrong because you don't want to think too hard about it, that's where I start taking issue with this. So here's the problem with this interpretation, is that it is based on not wanting to think about it, and it's also completely 100% wrong. So, I don't mean to be mean or to offend anybody talking about this, but I think it's important to understand that when people say Nintendo did not design these games with a timeline in mind, that's only half true. So, the truth is, Nintendo designs these games gameplay first, and then story second, but that doesn't mean they design them without a story. And that's pretty prevalent in these games. They have very rich lore, very in-depth stories, but the thing is that they design the gameplay first. That is their priority. Their priority is, let's make this game fun to play, and then the story will fall into place. I know a lot of people take issues with the official timeline and everything, and my Dragon Break theory about Breath of the Wild and everything like that. We're not going to touch on Breath of the Wild in this timeline. We're going to talk about just the timeline that is present in Hyrule Historia and the Zelda Encyclopedia, and how this actually, if you look back even to A Link to the Past, from the start of Zelda, there's always been a timeline there. let's get started kind of in order of release, okay? So, Zelda 1 happens. Sometime later, Zelda 2 happens, and it is, guess what? As the name implies, a sequel to Zelda 1 featuring the same Link. When A Link to the Past was being designed, from the start, this game was designed as a prequel to Zelda 1. The box art on the back states that these characters you're playing as, this Link and Zelda, are the predecessors of Link and Zelda from the first game. This game is a prequel. It features the predecessors of these characters, and it takes place in the past, before Zelda 1 and 2. So already saying that they didn't design any timeline and that there is no connection to these games and they're all just legends and retellings of themselves, basically makes no sense. The next game to be made was Link's Awakening, and they're pretty open about the fact that Link's Awakening is a sequel to A Link to the Past. The next game, Ocarina of Time, or Ocarina of Time, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I always have said Ocarina, though, so please don't hate me for that. Ocarina. There are some great interviews pre-release. Miyamoto mentions that this Zelda game is the earliest Zelda game in the timeline. Takizawa, who is a character designer, mentions this time the story really wasn't an original. We're dealing with the imprisoning war of the Seven Sages from the SNES edition of Zelda. And then he talks a bit about Ganon's character design. But basically, in the backstory for A Link to the Past, which is you see in the game's opening cutscene, it explains that Ganon was trapped in the Sacred Realm by 7 sages, or 7 wise men, depending on which translation you're playing. It is mentioned that 7 sages sealed Ganon in the Sacred Realm after Ganon obtained the Triforce and corrupted the Sacred Realm into the Dark World. Now, here's the thing, is that a lot of people will say that later sequels contradict this because it can't happen. And then Hyrule Historia shoehorned this third timeline in to make it work. But there's a line of dialogue in A Link to the Past from one of the 7 maidens, actually the 3rd maiden that you free from the Dark World. And that connects this to this downfall timeline perfectly. She states that, "Do you know the prophecy of the Great Cataclysm? This is the way I heard it. If a person who has an evil heart gets the Triforce," that's going to be Ganon, "a hero is destined to appear." That's Link from Ocarina of Time. "And he alone must face the person who began the Great Cataclysm. If the evil one destroys the hero, nothing can save the world from his wicked reign. Only a person of the Knights of Hyrule who protected the royalty of Hyrule can become the hero. You are of their bloodline, aren't you? Then you must rescue Zelda without fail." So it's mentioned earlier that Link is the last in line, or the last in line of a direct descendant of the Knights of Hyrule. He's the last in their bloodline. So this line of dialogue already confirms that there's the downfall timeline, that there was a hero who appeared before Ganon and failed, then the Knights of Hyrule stepped in with the 7 sages, sealed Ganon in the Sacred Realm because they couldn't kill him, and then A Link to the Past starts. So, this was something that a lot of people, I think, overlooked, and something that I never even took into consideration until I was playing A Link to the Past very recently. By very recently, I mean I'm still playing through it, actually. You should check it out. I've been streaming it on Twitch, twitch.tv/CaptBurgerson. By the way, I'll put a little plug in there. Shameless plug. So already we've got a timeline happening. We've got Ocarina of Time was built as a backstory to A Link to the Past. And A Link to the Past explicitly mentions that if a hero fails and is destroyed by Ganon, then the descendant of the Knights of Hyrule can step in. That was a prophecy that's being fulfilled in A Link to the Past. So, what happens after Ocarina of Time? Well, Majora's Mask occurs, right? So it's a sequel to the ending of Ocarina of Time when Link goes back in time, prevents the future from happening, and relives his childhood, basically, right? Now, when The Wind Waker was coming out, okay, people asked Aonuma, who is the producer for The Legend of Zelda, where does this game take place? He says, after Ocarina of Time, takes place over 100 years after Ocarina of Time. You can tell this from the opening story. There are references to things from Ocarina located through the game as well. And then Miyamoto asks, well, wait, which point does the 100 years start from? Aonuma says, from the end. Miyamoto says, no, I mean as a child, or... So already, they've got this in mind, that there's 2 endings to Ocarina of Time, that there's multiple ways that this game ends, right? So Aonuma says, oh right, let me elaborate on that. Ocarina of Time basically has two endings of sorts. One has Link as a child, and the other has him as an adult. This game, The Wind Waker, takes place 100 years after the adult Link defeats Ganon at the end of Ocarina of Time. Miyamoto then laughs and says, this is pretty confusing for us too, so be careful. And a lot of people say, well, Wind Waker was not designed with a split timeline in mind. But it kind of was, and the things that reference Majora's Mask in Wind Waker, I think there's some of it that's translation errors, and some of it is Easter eggs. So the Tingle Tuner stuff that you'll find in the Tower of Gods, that's just Easter egg stuff. We don't really need to take that into canon consideration. The other stuff here, there is a line of dialogue where the King of Red Lions mentions that Link, the hero of time, saved Hyrule and then left on a journey to another land. That is actually a mistranslation in the English version. In the Japanese version, he mentions that the hero of time defeated Ganon and then went on a journey through time, which would be when Zelda sent Link back in time at the end of Ocarina of Time. Now, we know that Twilight Princess takes place, of course, at the end of the child timeline after Majora's Mask. Not at the end. There's also Four Swords, but I misspoke there. In an interview with Aonuma, he was asked when Twilight Princess takes place. He says, in the world of Ocarina of Time, 100 and something years later. And then he's asked, what about the Wind Waker? Aonuma replies, the Wind Waker is parallel. In Ocarina of Time, Link flew 7 years in time. He beat Ganon and went back to being a kid, remember? Twilight Princess takes place in the world of Ocarina of Time 100 and something years after the piece returned to child Link's time. In the last scene of Ocarina of Time, Link and Zelda have a little talk, and as a consequence of that, their relationship with Ganon takes a whole new direction. In the middle of this game, Twilight Princess, there's a scene showing Ganon's execution. It was decided that Ganon be executed because he'd do something outrageous if they let him be. That scene takes place several years after Ocarina of Time. Ganon was sent to another world, and now he wants to obtain power. The point being, there's a very clearly laid out timeline. Link to the Past has said in its in-game dialogue that it takes place in an era where Ocarina of Time Link has failed. Twilight Princess has clearly laid out that child Link in Ocarina of Time prevented the events of the adult period of Ocarina of Time from happening. Ganon was executed and then the game starts. Well, executed. And Wind Waker very clearly lays out that it sets forth from the point at which Link defeats Ganon in the future, and that world's timeline carries on. The rest of the games are well laid out and fallen into place as well. I don't think we need to go too much into that, but the point is that from the start, Nintendo had a timeline. Maybe they didn't want to show it to us, maybe they weren't ready, and there's some stuff that's moved around between iterations of the timeline, but the core of it has remained the same. I mean, if there's something that contradicts all of this that you want to bring up, I'm open to it, by the way, and I would love to have a discussion with you about it. So feel free to comment below and tear me a new one, whatever you gotta do. But I think that this is some pretty strong evidence that I have yet to see a lot of people take into account, especially the dialogue from A Link to the Past. So part of what is fun for me about these games is connecting the dots. It's like a big puzzle, and I love it. And if you just want to play the game and not have theories thrown in your face, and you just want to enjoy each game individually for what they are, I can appreciate that. I understand. But when I'm having fun putting these pieces together, and you tell me, no, don't do that because Nintendo doesn't think about it that way, you're lying to me and you're lying to yourself. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I've got. I want to say thanks for listening to me rant about this today. Anyways, thank you guys for watching this video. If you want to see me rant some more, you can subscribe, or you can check out the podcast that I co-host. I've also got a website called burgersonmedia.com, but of course, if you want to see more videos from NSHG Films here, you can check out our website, nshgfilms.com, or subscribe to the channel. Thanks again for watching, you guys. Really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.